And welcome to the Clean Transit Enterprise Board meeting. We are waiting for a few more directors to join, but we should be getting started shortly. Again, everyone, we do have a quorum of directors present. Director Averill, would you be willing to start off the meeting? I don't see Director Fromer on the line quite yet.
Sure, let me get my wits about me.
He's here.
Wasn't planning on running the meeting, so let me pull up the agenda in a place I can get to it.
All right, and I saw that Director Fromer just joined, so
Okay,
I think we may
that's
be all
great.
set.
Thank you.
Um,
I'm not going to stop you if you want to take over.
No, it's all you, buddy.
Great. So we do have a quorum present. We have directors Fromer, Trowbridge, Block, Jones, Averill, Blinn, Coffin, Garcia. I think I saw Garcia just arrive. Yeah, so we can go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
Okay, excellent. Can that serve as our roll call?
It can.
Okay, great. So next on the agenda, we have public comment. Is there anyone in this meeting who wants to offer public comment this morning?
We did not receive any requests for public comment for today's meeting.
Okay, well, thanks for getting that on the agenda. I know there was interest last meeting, so perhaps we'll get more in the future. Moving on to our first decision item today, approval of the June 27, 2024 CTE board meeting minutes. I'll make a motion to approve those minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, meeting minutes are approved. Next up, an update from Kay Kelly.
We can't hear you.
I apologize. I've got a different view here than I normally do. So I am now unmuted and can speak. So I think all of our meetings are exciting, but this one is particularly exciting because we do have our award recommendations for the first round of capital awards for the enterprise We had many great proposals. The evaluation committee had to make some hard decisions, but we are super excited about the boost to zero emission transit in Colorado that will come from the board's decision today. So just a big thank you to all of our evaluation committee and all the staff who worked hard to help us get to where we are today. So a very exciting meeting for sure. So at the last meeting, we did ask for the board's approval to request a change to our spending authority. We submitted that request to OSPB, the Office of State Planning and Budget, on August 1st. We're now waiting for their response, so we will keep the board updated when we hear back from them, but wanted to let you know that, that we did submit that request. At the last meeting, we also did brief the board on the new business purpose that was added to the enterprise from SB 24230. That was a bill that was signed just prior to our June board meeting. So staff has been hard at work in the background doing some administrative setup items that will allow us to fund the startup efforts related to the oil and gas production fees. There's an item in today's enterprise financial update that goes into some more detail on that. But in short, once we have the loan in place from the Transportation Commission, we will be full speed ahead with the board in preparing for that new revenue stream. Anxious to get started, but we have to have a way to pay for it first. So, so that's what that action item is in the enterprise update today. I also wanted to flag for the board that the state of Colorado is planning to submit an application to the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant Program. This is the competitive portion of the federal NEVI funds, National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Funds. So we are looking at submitting a large application for developing some medium and heavy duty vehicle charging hubs that would allow us to put out more than 100 350 kilowatt or higher public chargers designed for medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. Those need to be on the NEVI designated corridors. They'd be mostly in the Front Range, the Denver Metro North Front Range area. So I-25, I-70, I-76, I-225, I-270, kind of in that Denver Metro North Front Range area. So if you are a transit fleet or any fleet operating in these areas and think that you would benefit from some public charging opportunities for your medium and heavy duty vehicles, the team would love to get a letter of support from you for that application. So the link here on the screen, and we'll pop that into the chat as well, will take you to the webpage for more information. The letters are due soon on August 26th. So if that's something of interest to you or your agency, we'd love to have you weigh in on that application. And then just the last quick thing from me, we are planning to send some staff to the Zero Emission Bus Conference, or ZEBCon. It has a very clever name. That's going to be next week in Philadelphia. We've sent someone the last few years and have found it to be just a really valuable forum to really drink from the fire hose on all things zero emission transit. We know not many transit agencies are able to attend conferences like this. This is a particularly costly conference, but we do make a point that when we send staff, we take good notes. We try to share out all the key things we learned from that event with our transit agency partners. We share that in forums like the CASTA conference, the Colorado Electric Vehicle Coalition Transit Working Group. And it also just continues to build the knowledge base of our staff who provides us great advice, throughout the year for our CTE purposes. They serve on our selection committees for zero emission bus grants, and they just kind of serve as a resource to other agencies statewide. So valuable conference. Happy to see what we learned this year and continue to share those learnings with others within the state. And that's my whole report for today. So happy to entertain any questions. Back to you.
Okay, I do have one question about the fueling corridors to the NEVI grant. I'm just looking at the maps on the CDOT website. It looks like there's a buffer to either side of those proposed corridors. I don't know if it's like 5 miles, right? I'm assuming you're allowed to build the charging stations anywhere in that buffer, and then can they be used by any medium or heavy duty zero emission vehicle?
That's correct. Yep, so they need to be within that buffer zone of those corridors, but the requirements are that the chargers would be open to the public, so they wouldn't be behind the fence for a particular fleet to use. And this kind of feeds into the larger strategy around, a lot of the fleets that are adopting right now have private charging. And there are some fleets who would benefit from public charging, and even some fleets who have behind the fence charging would benefit from the opportunity to charge in public occasionally. So, so this will be a grant focused on public availability for medium and heavy duties.
Okay. And are we thinking that's a good fit for transit, or we really need the private charging?
So far, transit agencies have been mostly private charging, but we're looking for anyone operating a medium and heavy duty fleet to weigh in and say that this is a good idea. I think opportunity charging on some of the larger longer transit routes is a possibility, but we haven't had public medium and heavy duty charging, so it hasn't been an option for a lot of them so far.
Director Garcia?
Thank you. Kay, I just had a question on the oil and gas agenda item that you talked about there with OSBP. Is that correct? How does the Transportation Commission's approval of funding the loan that was approved at our July meeting or August meeting pertain to that OSBP action?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So, so the action that the board asked us to take in June was related to the original retail delivery fee funding stream that is annually appropriated. All of the new revenue streams from the oil and gas production fee are continuously appropriated. So it does not actually relate to that at all. So it's asking for a continuous spending authority from the retail delivery fee that would match what is in statute already for the oil and gas fee.
Okay, so that helps clarify it. And then just news for everybody that the TC did approve the $600,000 loan for Clean Enterprise support, admin support until those funds are on board, correct?
Yeah, and actually I'll put a finer point on what you said, Director Garcia, but the TC set aside the money and will approve the loan at their September meeting. So what we'll be doing today is approving the actual loan amount with CTE board, and then it will go back to us once we have the actual loan document. So so you approve setting aside the money for this purpose, but yeah, close.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I'll hand it over to Kay Ruska to give us an update on the financials.
Yes, so Kay Haruska here, Enterprise Controller. These are the figures through June of 2024. These should not be considered final as we are still going through our year-end process. Entries are still being made from OSC, and also they have not been audited. So any balances related to FY24, whether it's cash or anything on here, please don't consider these final. I don't see them changing drastically, but I just don't want any surprises. So as you can see, most of the expenses are related to staff costs of administrating CTE. And then total revenue is approximately 10 million otherwise for FY24. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Cassie.
Hi everyone, Cassie Rudder. I'm with the CDOT budget office. And if there are no questions for Kay, yeah, here we go. So I'm going to provide a quick update on our revenue forecast. So for fiscal year 24, we're still finalizing our revenue reconciliation, but at this point, it looks like we had forecasted about just under 9 million in revenue from the retail delivery fee, and we collected about 10.7, so came in a little bit higher than forecasted for fiscal year 24. And then for fiscal year 25, we've actually revised our forecast upwards. So initially we had been forecasting about 9.9 million in retail delivery fee revenue. We've revised that upward to about 11.3 million that we're now forecasting for fiscal year 25. And then going forward for this presentation, we will also be including our forecast for the new oil and gas production fee revenue from Senate Bill 230. So you can see we've got the 3 different funds listed and the amounts that we're forecasting in revenue to each of those funds. And of course, as a reminder, with Proposition 117, we're forecasting that the revenue collections would be limited to just under about 57 million for fiscal year 26. And then it'll go up from there, starting in fiscal year 27. So any questions on revenue? Excellent. We can go to the next one. Thank you. So an update on just the cash balance for the Clean Transit Enterprise Cash Fund. Our year-ending cash balance is about 19.5 million. About halfway through period 2 of fiscal year 25, we're at about 20.3 million. So 20.3 million so far. And then of course, we've got 18 million in spending authority for fiscal year 25 that was adopted by the Joint Budget Committee back in February. So that is the current status on the fund. And then if we can go to the next one. All right. So as you guys were already kind of talking about, we've got the loan, the startup loan for Senate Bill 230. So I think you're all pretty well aware that there's a startup loan that will be needed to kind of front the upfront costs associated with implementing Senate Bill 230. There's some work that needs to happen in the current fiscal year, even though we won't start actually collecting revenue until next fiscal year. So we've asked for the Transportation Commission to set aside some funding to do a temporary loan to the Clean Transit Enterprise. And so this is the information that was provided to them, kind of the cost estimate. So a total of $600,000 for some personal services, professional services, and some operating costs. And we can go to the next slide. And then these are the terms of the loan that we're proposing. So the 3.5% interest rate comes from the Colorado or the State Infrastructure Bank Loan Program. So that is kind of the standard interest rate that we use for temporary loans from the Transportation Commission. So they've just adopted a new rate for fiscal year 25 of 3.5%. So that is the interest rate we're assuming for this loan. The payback period would be a full fiscal year. So we're anticipating a payback in fiscal year 26 of 621,000. So about 21,000 in interest. And the next slide, please. So as Kay already mentioned, so this was presented to the Transportation Commission during their August workshop in August. So they did approve a resolution to set the funding aside. So the funding has been made available. So sort of the next steps would be for today, the CTE board would adopt, a resolution to approve the loan, receiving the loan from the Transportation Commission. And then once that's approved by the board, we will return to the Transportation Commission next month at their September meeting and ask for them to actually adopt the official loan with the terms and the loan agreement and everything. And then at that point, the funds would be made available to CTE. So if there are any questions on the loan, you can. All right, then last step is for hopefully a motion to approve the TC loan for $600,000. Anyone would like to make a motion?
Sure. I'll move for the Clean Transit Enterprise to approve the Transportation Commission loan amount of $600,000 for startup costs relating to Senate Bill 24-230.
I'll second the loan.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed say nay. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion is approved.
I did have a question, Chair, for Chris on one of her slides, slide 2. Right, yeah, this one right here, the spending authority at 18 million from the JBC. Can you refresh our memory on what that is, please?
Yeah, sure. So the spending authority, this was a budget amendment that was submitted for approval back in January. asking for the legislature to increase spending authority for fiscal year 25 to cover the full forecasted fund balance. So at that time, this 18.1 million was what we were forecasting for the fund balance for fiscal year 25. And so that was intended to cover what we were forecasting for revenue for fiscal year 25, but also what had been collected previously, so that you had sufficient spending authority to cover the full, all the commitments that had been made at that point. So it was sort of a point in time calculation.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And thank you also for having a slide on our cash balances. It's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thanks, Cassie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, next on the agenda, we're going to invite Emily, Shilpa, and Andy to present the CTE Capital Grant Program Award recommendations.
Thank you, Director Farmer. Hello, everyone. My name is Andy Gillespie, and I'm a project manager in the Electrification Energy Group with the Office of Innovative Mobility, filling in for Mike King, who is on leave today. But today, Shilpa, Emily, and I will talk you through the Capital Grant Award recommendations. So a quick overview of all of our round one grants to date. Last year, the board approved 4 awards for the planning projects in the fall of 2023. And currently the contracting process is underway with expected to receive notices to proceed this fall. And for the capital projects, the applications closed on May 3rd of 2024 with around 15 million in CTE funding available. And we received over 28 million in applications for the 3 different categories: facilities, infrastructure, and vehicles. And then in July, a panel of subject matter experts scored the applications based on the criteria established by the CTE board outlined in the 10-year plan. And we brought the recommended awards for review in front of the Chief Innovative Mobility and the Director of DTR. And now we're bringing them to you, the CTE board, for review and potential approval. Next slide, please. So the capital grants are broken into 3 different grant opportunities. The first is facilities, which was created to support the modification or upgrade of existing transit facilities to make them safe and suitable for ZEV deployments. This category requires a 50% local match. Next, we have the infrastructure program, which supports the purchase and installation of charging and fueling infrastructure to support transit ZEVs. This category requires a 20% local match. And finally, we have the vehicle program, which helps fund the purchase or acquisition of zero-emission transit vehicles. So this category can cover up to 100% of the incremental costs of the ZEV and doesn't require a match. However, the applicant should have a way to fund the remaining costs of the base vehicle. Next slide, please. So this is the grant evaluation criteria. Divided into 5 different categories based on the 10-year plan. The first is emissions reduction, service to DI communities, agency and project readiness, match level, and geographic distribution. Next slide, please. These next couple slides are overviews of our recommendations. However, we will go into each application in detail and explain our recommendations further in this presentation. So for now, give you a few seconds to take in the applicants and project proposed for facilities and infrastructure. Next slide, please. And this is slide 1 of the vehicle applications. And then next slide, please. And these are the remaining applications. Next slide, please. All right, I'm gonna pass it to Shilpa to go into more detail on their intended recommendations.
Thank you, Andy, for the summary. And now we will go through the applications in details and the recommendation as well. As we discussed, there are 3 types of applications: facility, infrastructure, and vehicles. For the facility, we received 2 applications. One was from VIA and another one was from RAFTA. we are applied for electrification of the facility at Boulder, and this project includes solar panel, battery energy storage system, control system, and of course, grid interconnection equipment. This project is recommended for the award. The second application in this category is from RAFTA. They did apply for the construction of the final core phase of their 8-phase regional transit center at Glenwood Spring. This project is withdrawn because they have secured 5339 funding from FTA. And next slide, please. Now we will discuss about infrastructure application. These are basically applications for purchasing and installation of charging infrastructures. First application is City of Fort Collins. They did apply for purchase and installation of charging infrastructure at 3 locations and solar panel at two locations and solar panel at 3 locations. This project is not recommended for the funding. Reason behind is limited funding, though this project aligned with their transit implementation plan. Second project is from RAFTA. They did apply for charging infrastructure to support their new purchases of 10 battery electric buses. They also applied funding for Volkswagen, and so Volkswagen program to have some resources to support this project partially, and hence this project will be partly funded with Volkswagen instead of CTE program. And the third application in this category is from Town of Avon. They did apply for the bus purchase, and in support to bus purchase, this is gonna be charging infrastructure application, and we committee has recommended to award this project, both the vehicle and charging infrastructure. Next slide, please. Now we are going to discuss about the vehicle applications. We received 12 vehicle applications, and out of 12, CTE committee recommended funding 9 applications. One of those recommended award is Laredo Hall Society for Exceptional Children and Adult. They have applied for 2 electric vans, and this project is gonna get funded for their incremental cost of EV buses, EV vans. Second application is RAFTA, as I shortly discussed about their EV bus purchase application. They did apply for CTE funding and Volkswagen. So this project will be supported by both project, or recommended to supported by both project. And third application is from Development Disability Resource Center. They did apply for 2 electric vans, and this project is recommended for funding. Next slide, please. Fourth one is Town of Breckenridge. This is another application which has made request for both type of fundings, CTE and Volkswagen, and this they have requested for 7 buses, and this project will be partly funded with CTE and Volkswagen. Number 5 is Town of Telluride. They requested for 1 electric BOC cutaway bus, and this project is recommended for funding. And the 6th one is another same category, which is Town of Winter Park. Requested funds both CTE and Volkswagen, and again, this project is recommended for partial funding through CTE and partial funding through Volkswagen. Next slide, please. Town of Avon, they requested for 2 buses, and this project is recommended for funding. Next is City of Fort Collins. They did apply for 4 buses, and at the same time, they applied for 5339 funds, and unfortunately, they couldn't secure their 5339 funds. So the committee has recommended one bus for their project. And the last one is which committee recommended for funding is City of Boulder. They requested for 2 buses, but considering the limited fund, this project will be partially funded. That is, CTE will cover only one BOC, one bus instead of 2 buses. Mark, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. I was just curious what the partial funding amounts were on several of these requests. It would be helpful to know what that recommendation would be. And I'm assuming the award is the full ask price there, so.
Yeah, so award amounts are
Maybe-
included in the title, where you can see City of Boulder will receive $595,828 through this funding, through the CTA.
Yeah, those, I'm talking about all the applications though. So maybe there's a slide denoting them at some point.
Okay. Next slide, please. And these are the 3 applications which committee recommended not to fund. First one is Town of Avon. They basically applied to cover the gap between the vehicle pricing and the award they secured in 2022 capital application with DTR. Since this project was initially funded through DTR, so DTR is considering to fund this project with their current funding programs, and hence this is not recommended for CTE program. The second application, which committee not considering for funding, is Mountain Valley Development Services. Unfortunately, this application couldn't score very well, and the biggest remark was they didn't have the transition implementation plan. So CTE staff will reach out to them and encourage them to apply for planning funds and complete their implementation plan before applying for the capital funding. And the last one is City of Aspen. They requested for 1 bus. Unfortunately, this application couldn't score very well since there was lack of information or insufficient information on key questions. And next slide, please. That's it. So if the board approves the committee's recommendation, CTE program will partially, it means the incremental cost of 28 vehicles. Yeah, it will provide 80% funding for charging infrastructure, that is Town of Avon, and 50% funding for fleet electrification, that is a project from VIA. And next slide, please.
Director Garcia?
Yeah, before we move for motion to approve, I had a question on the Fort Collins, City of Fort Collins denial. Can you provide more information on that, please?
They applied for both applications for the 5339 and CTE funding, but at the time of application, I guess there was some communication about this project, and considering the limited funds we have in this pool, instead of providing full funding for this project, they would like to consider only 1 bus, and that's what we are covering with.
So it was a combination of their 2 grant requests and narrowing it down to funding 1. Is that correct?
Yes, and at the same time, limited CTE funds as well.
Great, thank you.
Director Averill?
Yeah, thank you. I think I asked at a previous meeting about eligibility for private nonprofits. And that would include MBDS and I think Clarendon in this application. And I hate to do this, but I do have concerns that that there's a potential that private nonprofits are not eligible based on the language in the legislation and the definitions that are provided therein. I don't want to get into the details of that, and I'm willing to move forward on something here, but I would request that we have a written opinion from the AG's office on eligibility of those entities, because they do not technically provide public transit services. They're client-based organizations. So like I couldn't walk up and jump on one of their buses. Neither could you, unless you're one of their clients, if you will. And the legislation is very explicit about public transportation operators and things like that. They're in the definitions. And I would just like us to make sure that we're within the bounds of the intent and the legal boundaries of the legislation before we do a contract, for instance. So again, I think this is a great process. I'm not commenting on the worthiness of these applications at all. I think they're really good applications. They make sense. But I do want us just to, out of an abundance of caution, to check that box as a board moving forward on these types of on this approval as well as future applications, because we could get sideways with some of our public agencies that there's no dispute whether or not they're eligible. If we're funding some of these other projects that are a little bit in a gray area and telling folks like Fort Collins no, I just don't want to see us get burned in the long run. So I would just offer that for the group's consideration.
I apologize that I can't raise my hand. I'm using a different view because I'm a co-presenter today, but I do hear what you're saying on the definitions. And I think in addition to what's in the legislation, CTE has in rule a definition of eligibility that we've been looking at that's in addition to what's in the legislation. But that is something that we're actively taking a look at related to, understanding what the true definition is of a transit agency. And there are multiple definitions in statute. So I feel confident that they're eligible based on what I have seen, but I'm happy to also pull in an additional legal opinion, which we're already kind of in the process of doing.
Yeah, I hope that we can do that and that the board can agree to do that, because I respectfully disagree. In my interpretation and reading of it, I just don't see it. But I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. It wouldn't be the first time. So I just would really like to check that box.
Director Garcia?
So in light of this discussion, if Director Averill was correct and we did award funds in this round, how would that play out for us? Is that problematic, or would it be wise to maybe get an opinion before we issue any dollars to a program that we may approve today or request today? Just a thought there to further the discussion.
I would be happy to offer a motion for approval with the condition that the eligibility is reviewed by the AG's office. That's kind of all I'm after. But I don't want to hold things up. That's not the point here. I just out of an abundance of caution, I think it'd be great to hear from the AG's office definitively on this.
We do have Kathy Young on the call. Kathy, are you able to weigh in?
Hey, Kay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, no, I definitely will need to review this before I'm in a position to issue a legal opinion. But the board is represented by counsel, just like the enterprise has counsel. I'm both. I serve as both. If we think we're going to end up with a conflict on this, we'll get another attorney involved. But yeah, I'm happy to take a look, and I'll touch base with Kay initially on this and let you know what I think.
I just went ahead and entered the parts of the legislation and bills that concern me. It's in the chat, so you can chase the legal reference, but
Okay, no, thank
that's
you.
what I pulled out of there. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess at this stage, do we think it makes sense to move forward with a motion on the condition that eligibility is reviewed by Kathy and others? I guess the other option would be to postpone the motion, schedule another meeting, and wait for that legal opinion first.
Would it be acceptable, so we don't hold up the others? There seems to be two that are in question. Would it be acceptable to approve all but those two pending legal opinion?
I was going to make the same suggestion. I think that's a good idea.
Good. And I did also just pop into the chat the Clean Transit Enterprise rule that defines transit agency as an organization that provides transit services to the general public or a segment of the public defined by age, disability, or low income. And that was part of our initial rulemaking. So so that's kind of the additional piece that I had mentioned when we were thinking about the full definition of transit agency and how it applies in this situation.
Maybe
Okay.
maybe part of the review is to make sure this rule language doesn't conflict with the legislation.
Commissioner Garcia, I think that's a great idea. I would hate to see conflicting definitions in place. That just creates more confusion.
Okay. I'm hearing from a few directors that we do feel like we need a little bit more time to review these legal definitions and get further clarity on this. But we do want to move forward with the motion, at least for the applications that we feel more confident about. I guess before we do that, are there any other questions about these proposals, the review process? I just want to open the floor. Director Kaufman?
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate the discussion here. And I just want to say I was excited to see the range of applications and different types of projects throughout the state. I have a general question about project timelines. Like I appreciate that the project materials were included in the link in the board packet as well. But as far as like they include estimates for when equipment will be purchased and then estimates for delivery. I'm curious, like, do we have flexibility within the program? Like, say if there's delays of delivery or significant delays of delivery, which sometimes happens with this type of these types of projects. I'm curious if someone can speak to that part of the process. Like, is it pretty flexible where they'll just keep staff updated on delays, or do they have a deadline that they have to meet if a significant delay is expected?
Yeah, so in our grant agreement, we do have milestone mentioned where agencies have to report to PMs about the progress made throughout the process. And in general, we keep 2 years in case of EV infrastructure process as a length of the performance period. And for vehicle, it is between 3 to 4 years as a performance period. So with our prior experience, I think this is sufficient time, but in case if we need another extension, there is an opportunity where they can agencies can work with our project managers and can extend the grant agreements.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Shilpa. Director Garcia?
Thank you, Chair. Good question, Director Coven. I had another question early on the early slide, maybe the first slide, about our existing contracts through the planning phase of our grant awards. And my understanding is we still haven't issued contracts on that. Can you provide an update on that, please? And I think that pertains to this grant round as well. And the question that was posed earlier, are we going to be able to turn around and get contracts out in a timely manner to these that are awarded funding?
Yeah, I can jump in on this a little bit. So we are making progress on those 4 awards. It does, I know it seems like we're not, but we are. I actually have finished a draft of those scopes, and so the next step is going to be making sure that we have all of the contract language tightened up as far as separating CDOT and enterprise language. So that is going to be happening over the next couple of months, and hopefully we'll be able to get those awards out probably by the end of the year. I will say that as we go through this process, we are having to create new scoping documents because of the types of projects that these funds are utilized for. So that's kind of the part where we're a little bit behind on it. But I think that's also part of what the new director position will support. And I'm optimistic that we'll be able to move those things forward much quicker moving in the future. So I think that's kind of all to say. We haven't made visible progress externally yet, but we are making progress internally, and I expect that to even become quicker. I expect that to happen sooner and faster in the coming months.
I'll weigh in here and say that, you know, in general, there have been around 400 transit contracts that have gone out in the last year. So these are, you know, 4 in a sea of many, many contracts. So it's been a big workload over the course of the last year, and these will get issued like all the rest of them. So.
Thank you, Emily and Kay. I have a few questions. One is, so there's like 4 eligible uses of the CTE grants. There's the facilities, infrastructure, vehicles, and then the 4th one is planning. And I'm just noticing we didn't receive any applications around planning. Do you have a sense of why that is?
So to clarify, we had our planning call for projects at a different time. So typically we separate out planning, admin, and operating in a call for projects. And of that planning, admin, and operating, CTE is a portion of those funds. And then we have a capital call for projects where CTE is a portion of those of that call for projects. So this is only related to the capital call. We would issue another planning call at some point in the future.
Okay, thanks for that clarity. Another question I have is around the Volkswagen settlement money. I'm trying to get a better sense of, because these 2 programs seem to complement one another, in CTE and VW. How much of the VW settlement money was used to support these grants, and how much do we have left? Is it something we can rely on in future years?
I'll jump in on this one. So the Volkswagen settlement program started in 2017, and at the time we set aside money specifically for transit electrification work. The rest of the money for other fleets was handled by the Department of Public Health and Environment. A portion of the money came to CDOT for transit purposes, and that's all enshrined in our settlement agreement with EPA. The Volkswagen settlement money is related to an emissions cheating scandal by Volkswagen, and the funding was distributed to states based on a formula of how many of those vehicles they had operating for so long. And that's a finite amount of money that has to be spent in a finite amount of time. And it is very complementary to the business purpose of the Clean Transit Enterprise. However, we knew that this was going to be our last round of Volkswagen money. The Volkswagen awards that are complementing some of the CTE awards will completely spend down the last of the Volkswagen money. I think overall it's a nice story, right? The Volkswagen money kind of seeded this, but the Clean Transit Enterprise money is intended to be the long-term funding stream for clean transit vehicles in the state. We had this round where they kind of overlapped, but this will be the only round that happens, because this will effectively be the end of the Volkswagen money. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I just want to point out that, right, we're basically oversubscribed by a factor 2 to 1. 28 million requested, 15 million available. So there's lots of demand. One other question I had is just sort of the related to the math behind the scoring, and particularly around emissions reductions. And this might be tough, but like, it helped to get a sense of sort of the amount of greenhouse gas savings we're talking about here, like how many cars were taken off the road with the CTE program, just to help kind of wrap my head around the value on climate.
Yeah, I don't think we have those calculations on hand, but there are, some tools we can use to think about what that estimate would be.
Okay, anything you could share on that, I'd really appreciate.
Yes, Director Farmer, just to add a little more to that, we use the A-Fleet tool, so I can go back and look for our calculations and pass them over to you.
Thank you. Any other questions on the capital award recommendations? Okay, so I want to move into the motion here, but it does seem like we're going to set aside 2 of the applications.
How about I offer a motion, if you would indulge me, Chair,
Okay.
for consideration.
Yep.
And I can move for this right now, or just read it to you and we can discuss it. But I move for the Clean Transit Enterprise Board to conditionally approve, pending a legal review of applicant eligibility based on the language of SB 21-260 and applicability of subsequent CTE program rules, to get to Kay's point, the 2024 capital awards as detailed in the award recommendations memo, on just verbatim from what we have on the screen in front of us. So I've added in the need for a legal review based on the language in the legislation, as well as the rules that the CTE board has subsequently approved, assuming since it's been created after the legislation. Does that make sense to folks?
If I may, I think there were 2 perspectives that I heard us discuss. One, to do something like that, and the other to approve all of the grants except for the 2 where there were some questions. I think it would be simpler to just remove the 2 in question and make a motion for the remaining projects. It's straightforward.
If folks want to handle it that way, I'm amenable to that too. I just didn't want to kick them out at this point.
Well, can we get a clarification on the first motion, please?
Well, Commissioner Garcia, I wasn't really offering one. I was just telling you what I would have offered. And Shoshana came back with a good suggestion, I think. If we want to move forward with making a motion to approve all but those 2 projects, I'm amenable to that. It's not necessarily my preference, but if it's the cleanest way to do it, then that's great.
can I ask, I guess, what would be the timeline for considering the two projects we're setting aside? Those need to be approved by October or well before then?
The board doesn't have any deadlines associated with what their approvals, so
Okay.
I'll chime in real quick. I agree. It probably makes more sense to not put a contingency on the entire vote for all of the grants and just take the two out. Of course, I also trust staff to not lead the commission astray in this, but it seems like there is, enough question. I would have supported a vote to just keep them in and move forward with this language as recommended. But if there's a majority of the commission that wants to remove the two, I will support that, but I'd also support a motion just to keep things as is and have staff certainly inform us if we've gone astray.
and which are the two awards that we are pulling out for clarification?
From my listening to the conversation, it sounds like it's the Larandon Hall Society for Exceptional Children and Adults and the Developmental Disabilities Resource Center, but I'm not sure.
Yes, those are the two that I was looking at. Thanks, Chris. And I in no way will be offended if people want to put forward the whole package, just for clarification. Just again, out of an abundance of caution, I just want real clarity on this stuff.
And Kay, this is Kathy. I've looked through everything and I think I have an initial opinion. I sure don't want to complicate this meeting, but I found, I think, what you were looking at as far as nonprofits. And I'm happy to just kind of speak for a few minutes and then still can get something in writing to the group.
I would appreciate you sharing that, Kathy. I don't know about the other folks.
Sure. I'm going to just say, so a nonprofit is, if you look at the definitions of what an eligible entity is, an eligible entity means a local government, local or regional transit district, a regional transportation authority serving one or more counties, or nonprofit organization that provides public transit. And I hear you that I think it's what is public transit. I think you can argue that, that I think that's what it comes down to. What does public mean? And so I will dig into that. I just wanted to flag, though, that I think I'm not sure, so I just need to look into that. It doesn't mean, broadly any member of the public, or is that definition, can that definition be more limited to, public, but limited to a certain group of people?
Kathy, I think that is exactly the rub. It's not the type of organization that's applied, it's the type of services they're going to apply with the funding.
Okay. So I take it back. I don't have an absolute answer right now, but I think we've limited it to really just that term, and I'll look into it right away. And like I said, I'll touch base with Kay initially on this.
Thank you.
Might it be able to, I know maybe it's not super easy. I have been in board meetings where there's been revised language that gets put up on the screen, because if we're going to remove the two, all these numbers change. So it's trying to form a new motion with the two removed might be a little long-winded.
I also want to offer that the Laridan Hall Society for Exceptional Children and Adults was approved for a planning grant. So the board did approve them for a planning award last year. And at that point, we believe that they did meet eligibility.
Director Garcia?
Thank you. Do we know what the two grants are and the totals?
Yeah, it's 388,484, all vehicles.
Well, I'd make a motion to approve the recommendations with exception of the two requests in question that we are seeking legal review of legislative and rural language.
If that motion suffices as far as staff's perspective, I will second it.
Is staff okay with the language of that motion? Or do we need to specifically call out the two applications in question and revise these numbers? If so, maybe do we want to circle back toward the end of the meeting with revised language there, or?
That's what I was going to suggest. I feel like my hands are a little tied with being a presenter for the meeting today. So I've got like screens occupied, but we can do some math, revise the slide, pull it back up at the end of the meeting. If that would make staff more comfortable or would make the board more comfortable with the actual dollar amounts, actual number of projects, actual number of vehicles, and then maybe we can do conditional award for this pending legal approval for the other two. So, so if staff can work on that in the background, we can move on to Kathy Young's presentation, and then we'll come back to the motion at the end.
Excellent.
So we'll just table the current motion and replace it with a potentially revised one soon.
Okay. I appreciate your flexibility. Okay, so we're going to come back to that. Next on the agenda, we have a presentation from Kathy on the board member best practices training. I'll kick it over to you, Kathy.
Thank you. And there's quite a bit of material here, and I am not going to have us run late. So I'll just say at the front, my sorry, I got the date wrong. Today looks like it's 21st. So, but there is my email address. Please, anyone, don't hesitate to reach out to me and talk through any questions you have. So I'll just offer that at the beginning. Next slide, please. So the reason we are doing this training is because it's a good idea, but it's actually also a legal requirement. Several years ago now, the legislature wrote into, passed a law that all state public boards need to receive annual training. There's quite a bit outlined in that. Some of it just is not pertinent to this particular board, but a few of the key issues are that just a refresh on what the board's statutory powers and duties are, which actually our discussion today has been important. It's important for the board to know what the statute says, what your powers are. Another area that we need to train on is identifying and managing conflicts of interest, and then also understanding the requirements of the Colorado Open Records Act and the Open Meetings Law. Next slide, please. So the Clean Transit Enterprise, there's just, well, four statutes that that make up the entire body of statutory authority for CTE. 43.4, 1201 is the legislative, or I think there's a 1201. Then there's a 1202, which is definitions. 1203 talks about the legislative intent again, and then also spells out the board's duties. And then one to really feature for this year's training is the new statutory authority that was passed just this past legislative session, 43.4/1204, which creates a second fee for CTE, the production fee. It creates a new program, the Local Transit Operations Program, the Local Transit Grant Program, the Rail Funding Program, and also sets out what the cash funds are and a requirement that a report be submitted. So I'm again, just, I think you can probably Google it and find it, but I'm happy to send a copy of that also. You know, it really is not hard for me. If you just want a copy of, hey, do you mind sending me a copy of this? Shoot me an email and that'll be easy for me to do. And I don't think I can see if people have raised hands. I will hopefully have just a few minutes at the end for questions, but if you have questions now, if somebody could let me know if somebody raised their hand, I would appreciate it. Next slide. So the first topic, conflicts of interest. Because you all are unpaid, only receive, I don't even know that you receive a per diem, but unpaid board members, there's actually a pretty narrow prohibition or guidance on conflicts of interest. And you can see the language written out there and where you can find it in state law. But because you do not receive compensation, you shall not perform an official act which may have a direct economic benefit on a business or other undertaking in which you have a direct or substantial financial interest. Quickly, on the other side of that slide, there actually is a process that if you disclose it to the Secretary of State, you can take an official act, meaning you can vote on a resolution. That's probably never going to come up for us. I'll just use an example. You know, if you are employed by a transit provider that's going to be receiving a CTE grant, I would ask on that, just don't vote on it. That I think would be a pretty clear situation where we'd ask that you abstain. But, you know, it just is pretty narrow. That's where it's just prohibited, where it's clearly you have a conflict of interest. There very well might be times where it's a little grayer, and that's probably almost always. It's things just fall into a gray area. Again, don't hesitate to ask me. I mean, I do this a lot, talk with different board members, not just on CT, but various boards, about just kind of going back and forth and deciding, you know, is this an area where you should abstain? And so really it's very fact specific analysis. So next slide, please. Something I don't think I included last time I trained, it's a new slide that I've added, is you can read there when it was passed November 2006, but the amendment to the Colorado Constitution, that ethics in government. And it's something to point out is, as a board member of CTE, and you might be covered under Amendment 41 and other other facets of your life, but you are covered by Amendment 41. And Amendment 41 is, I don't want to simplify it too much, but it really is a gift ban that you should be, and this is in your role as a CTE board member. You know, in that role, you should be careful not to accept gifts. You can accept, and it's at $75 now. You can accept lunches. You know, again, if you're being offered a lunch or being offered a gift in your role as a CTE board member, there is actually a $75 a year allowance. But that's again very fact specific. It maybe would come up with being offered to go to a conference and giving travel expenses and things like that. There's actually quite a few exemptions from Amendment 41. You might be a speaker, and if you are a speaker, you know probably can accept the free or getting your entrance fee or registration fee waived, things like that. Just wanted to flag that for you. There is a very good website. It's listed there that the Independent Ethics Commission maintains. It's very user friendly, and it's just interesting for maybe for other hats that you wear in your life. There's not a ton of opinions about board members, but there's quite a few opinions about elected officials that sometimes are relevant to our analysis about what a board member can and can't do. But I just spent some time a couple weeks ago looking at it, and it really is. You know, they issue opinions and letter rulings and things like that, and if we really have a tough ethical question, we might end up asking the commission to give an opinion. We've done that for a few CDOT situations. You'll see one if you poke around the website. One of them is quite old now, but a CDOT historian wanted to use work that she prepared while employed by CDOT, but to put into a book. And the Independent Ethics Commission said that did not violate Amendment 41. Next slide, please. So another issue, another area to train on is open records. And the bright line rule on open records is that most documents that are prepared for the state as part of state employment or representing a state board are going to be open records. And we start with that, and then we work back to see if there's an exception that we then would not turn over a record because Cora allows us to. But it's always good, I think, to start from that premise. And I'll say as board members, Cora just does not come up a ton. It really is it is a requirement for state employees. We just don't get a lot of requests that ask for board member records, but we have on occasion. And who knows, when you move into the new role that CTE is playing, if there'll be heightened awareness of the board, and maybe we will start to get more open records requests, but with the production fee. But so just something to keep in mind. But as a board member, you'll just be asked to turn over any records that exist, and then staff and the AG's office, my unit, we take it from there. You'll never have to analyze it for if there's privileged information, things like that. We will just ask to please turn records over, and then we'll do the analysis. Next slide. So again, I don't think I even need to go over this slide. It's very broad. It's emails, absolutely. Text messages is a little bit grayer of an area. If it's on your private phone, I think there's an argument it's not a public record. but again, just give the advice that any text message that you're exchanging about CTE, let's just keep it professional, and if we have to turn over text messages, then we're not running into issues on that. If it's a state provided phone, I think it's pretty clear it's going to be a public record. But it, again, just very broad. Next slide. And so you start from the premise that it's a public record, and then you look through Cora, which is not an easy set of statutes to look through. It's pages and pages and pages long, but you look to see if there is a legitimate basis to deny inspection of the public record. And I've just cited to a couple of the CRS sites there. There really are quite a few reasons to deny. Attorney-client privilege, if they contain proprietary and trade secrets, employment records, we just simply never turn those over. But that's, again, really could probably take up an hour on open records law, and I'm not going to do that today. One thing that is interesting about Cora is that the legislature has taken a set of documents and just said, actually, these are just not public records. They're just flat out not public records. One interesting one that might come up for this board is the documents that are work product that's prepared for elected officials. The legislature has said those just simply aren't public records. And so a pretty narrow exception, doesn't come up a lot, but if the legislature asked this board, our drafts, our communications, we would probably hold those out. Any final report would, I'm sure, be a public record, but just an example. Next slide. Something to know about Cora is that there is a very short turnaround time. And so that's written into the Open Records Act. And so the legislature has deemed a reasonable response time from the state body to be 3 days, which, anyone that works 3 working days, I guess that's important to say, but anybody who works in government knows, it's almost impossible to get anything done in 3 working days, but that's the time period we've been given. There are some other time periods that you can work into that. You can, say that there's an extenuating circumstance and you get 7 additional working days. So for a total of 10. But important thing to know is if someone has asked for just one document, you cannot argue or assert extenuating circumstance. You just can't. So if someone asks for one specific document, then you need to get that to them in 3 days. And CDOT has, he does other things, but CDOT has a Cora officer, Andrew Hogel, and we work in my unit closely with Andrew. And so it just want to flag, if you get a request, you really need to just turn your attention to it right away. Next slide, please. So if you deny access, actually it's a fairly new cooling off period has been written into Cora. I think courts were getting tired of dealing with lawsuits over Cora. And so there has been a cooling off period of 14 days. And so you don't want to be too cute in answering it, but really you've got this short time period, 3 days. You can take an additional 7 days. And then really on top of that, another 14 days while you continue to work with the entity that has requested these, and they cannot sue you until that cooling off period has expired. And so we have real life examples of this, of, an entity telling us they're going to sue us, and we just keep going back and forth trying to either convince them that there just simply are no other responsive records, or, you know, the reason we're not turning them over is because we have valid reasons. But if you just cannot have a meeting of the minds, then you need to probably go to court over that. And I think an important point of this slide is there is a bit of a race to the courthouse, because you don't really, as the state entity, you sure don't want to get sued for an open records violation and lose, because you might have to pay court costs and reasonable attorney's fees. So we might end up going to court first and just asking really for help from the court, saying, you know, we really have a very good faith belief that we do not need to turn these records over. And then that's when we'd ask for an in-camera review. Next slide. So turning to open meetings laws, again, just understanding what the public policy of the state is that the formation of public policy and public business basically needs to be in the open. It shall not be in secret. And, you know, you can see the reasons there, and everyone on this call knows those reasons, but it gives the public a chance to be fully informed, and then also to participate in the legislative decision-making process. Next slide. So on this, it's, I think, obviously it's clear that when you go to a meeting, and virtual meetings are allowed, but meetings can be other ways too. And I think a key one, and I think sometimes people are surprised, is that you can create a public meeting by email. If you start to go back and forth and start discussing public business, and there's some ways to correct that, but I think we try to ask, like, let's not do that, right? If we need to be talking about something at a meeting, let's just hold off and talk about it at the meeting instead of creating that meeting via email. Next slide. And so I think we've got several directors who come from local governments, and on this, I'll just highlight that the open meetings laws for the state versus open meeting laws for political subdivisions are just different enough to really make it confusing. But a state, this board, a meeting is just 2 or more directors. And so I think the real key here is it a meeting? It probably might be a meeting even if we have just the 2, but it doesn't have to be noticed, prior notice, if we don't have a quorum or if we're not taking formal action. So it might be okay that we have a meeting, but it's definitely something we need to report in our minutes. But I think that sometimes is a surprise. So, and again, happy to talk about, so don't worry if two of you gather and start talking to CDOT staff about something and think that we created a meeting, really on that, let's just have a sentence in our minutes and make sure that it's recorded in the minutes. Next slide. And this is, again, I take a pretty, I would like to think common sense approach to what a meeting is. If 2 of you are driving together and have chit chat about clean transit issues, I don't think I'm going to think that's a meeting. Of course, if you're talking to each other about how you're going to vote on something, again, I think I'd say, please just hold off on doing that, because really just the 2 of you together, it very well might be creating a meeting. But if you're gathered at a seminar on transit issues and just learning about things that will help you in your role as a director, I would argue that the seminar that you're at, the core purpose of that seminar is not a Clean Transit Enterprise Board of Directors meeting. And so I don't think that that is a meeting that we need to notice or report in the minutes. But again, you know, be cognizant of the fact that you really shouldn't be gathering and talking about CTE business. And then if we do think a meeting happen, we will make sure it's covered in our minutes. Next slide. And I think I've touched on this. Meetings definitely need to be fully meetings, not all meetings. And I don't think I need to improve this slide. Meetings where we have a quorum or that where formal action is going to occur, that we definitely need to notice, and we need to do that 24 hours prior to the meeting. Really, more notice than that would be preferred, but that's the least amount of time. And you can do that on CTE's website. We used to have to post the notice on the doors of the headquarters building and things like that, but now, you know, CTE's website is sufficient. Next slide. And then we can just move on. Minutes are an absolute requirement to comply with open meetings laws. Next slide. And then executive session, just wanted to note that is an exception to open meetings laws, and it's absolutely a tool that any state board member can use. But you cannot take formal action in an executive session, and the topics are fairly limited. I think the next slide covers that. And then you need to follow specific steps to go into an executive session. You need a 2/3 vote in order to go. You have to record it, and you have to keep the recording for 90 days. So those are all things. That's part of my job, to make sure that any executive session is absolutely proper and defensible. Next slide. That's pretty limited what we can go in an executive session for. Those are the main topics. For the most part, attorney-client communication is one of the reasons we go in, talking about proprietary information. Every once in a while, you know, we go in for an employment matter. But it's a tool I think we use sparingly, but definitely is available. Next slide. And in the matter of time, I'll just quickly talk about that. You sure don't want to get sued for an improper executive session, and you would just go to court and talk to the judge and have the judge review your recording. And sometimes I think boards get into trouble by noticing it for a very limited reason, and then possibly just talking about more in the executive session than you should be talking about. Next slide. And failure to comply with open meetings, it's, you just don't obviously want that to happen. And you might end up having the action you took be invalidated. And really, it's the negative publicity is not something that we ever want to happen. Next slide. I think that's going to be it. And I just don't think we have time for questions. So I will say, please reach out to me, shoot me an email, and then we'll probably just get on the phone. Any questions you have, that's happy to discuss it and answer questions. And thank you for your time.
Thanks, Kathy. Director Jones?
Thanks, Kathy. And sorry, you said no questions, but
no. And I didn't see your hand. So no, I think we have, yes. Thank you. What's your question?
Pertains to the vote that's coming up. I am employed by the city of Boulder. I don't have any direct economic gain from a grant that a different department has applied for. But according to your guidance, you're suggesting that I should abstain from the vote. Want more direction on that?
Sure. And is your division anything you work in getting this money? I mean, do you have any? So I think you're okay. yeah, I think you're okay. I mean, it's a big organization, but yes, if you worked for the group that's getting the grant, then I would say, yeah, let's have you abstain. But nope, I think we're good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I know we're at time, but I want to go ahead and revisit the motion for the capital grants recommendations. Kay, do we have the updated language available?
Yes, let me see if I can get that to show up for you. There you go.
Okay.
So
do I have to
basically what
recite
staff
all
did
of it?
was just
Yeah.
subtract
Got-
out the two awards in question. So we revised the numbers and then added the second paragraph that there would be a conditional approval for the amount of money for the two projects associated with Laridan Hall and Developmental Disability Resource Council pending eligibility review and confirmation from legal counsel. So if the Attorney General's office says these are good, we would include them in the full approval package. If not, they would not be approved.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing a thumbs up from Director Averill. Any other questions or comments on this updated language? All right, I'm not seeing any. So I'm going to make the motion for the Clean Transit Enterprise Board to approve the 2024 capital awards as detailed in the award recommendations memo and based on the recommendations of the scoring committee and enterprise staff, which includes 1.5 million in program funds for one facility project, $384,000 in program funds for one infrastructure project, $923,000, $923,116 in program funds for 7 vehicle projects that will result in 24 vehicle purchases. So we're going to make the full motion here. So, and then in addition to that, with a conditional approval for $388,484 in program funds for 2 vehicle projects that will result in 4 vehicle purchases for Laridan Hall Society for Exceptional Children and Adults and for Developmental Disability Resource Council pending eligibility review and confirmation from legal counsel. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say nay. And any abstentions? All right, motion is approved.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for indulging me. I apologize for gumming things up. Was not my intent.
No problem at all, Director Averill. It's good to get clarity.
No, we appreciate the question. I'm glad we had the conversation. We will double, triple check and report back to the board via email once we've had a chance for our legal counsel to provide a recommendation here.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. With that, the meeting is adjourned. Have a good week.